Okay, if you guys remember the last chapter, we found out a lot about Raven and her family, right? We found out that her grandfather is actually a surgeon, which could definitely get him killed by the Catholic Church. But he starts teaching her, which is really good, all the secrets from the Kabbalah and other things that her mom has been kind of showing her on the side, but this is like official teaching now. And her grandfather is like, we're in real danger. Like, we're not going to make it. I've been praying all night, and you're the only one who's going to survive, basically. And she's like, no, 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 it's not going to happen. But meanwhile, she also took a step and told Andres that she's really Jewish, which was a huge risk. And then lo and behold, look at what this next chapter is called. This whole section, sorry, is called Husks. Who betrays you? And like, listen, it could be Andres or it could be Catalina, because at the well, Catalina was saying things like, oh my goodness, you don't even cross yourself right. Like there's something wrong with you. And just kept staring at her, like trying to figure it out. And it's no good. Like their friendship is dead. So whatever was holding Catalina back from putting two and two together and figuring out that she's Jewish, like that's gone. Right. Because sometimes we're so close to people, we don't see who they really are because we love them, and Catalina does not love her anymore. Okay, so husks are also, what's left over, right? From, shedding, that could be like a husk, or even from plants and stuff like that. There are husks. You could look up a definition. Look at this book. This book has been through some things. Every time we see this book, there is some new image. Before it was burning, and now it looks like it's after it's been burned. And there's still the ring there, which, what is that ring? I mean, like, who could that belong to? We shall see. Okay. So the chapter is blood. It was something small that made it happen. Small like the bite of a poisonous bug. That small thing was a kiss. You would think a kiss could only bring You would think a kiss could bring only good things into the world, but not this time. Andres and I continued to meet nearly every night under the olive tree where the hawk had been. It was our secret place. I hope that by now you realize hawk is like really representing Catalina, right? She's this dangerous bird that it's going to get people. She's so evil. Anyways, but secrets can only be kept for so long. I have learned that now. Catalina caught us. She waited in her yard, and when we met, she confronted us. It was a dark night, but there wasn't enough darkness to make this right. Catalina wanted us to explain ourselves. She felt it was her right to accuse us because she was the wronged party. We didn't mean for it to happen, I said. Catalina laughed a hard laugh. Andres tried to make her understand. You and I are like brother and sister, he told her. My love for you is there, he explained, but it's different than the way I feel about Estrella. I don't want your love, Catalina told him. Then she turned on me. I wish I'd never met you. I wish you'd never existed. Now, I wonder what else you've lied to me about. She closed her eyes as though I had already disappeared. When she opened them again, I knew she no longer saw me. I was nothing to her. Okay, so I thought the well was the end, but Catalina likes her drama. And so here she is, stirring it up and driving this confrontation, even though she knows that Andres is not, going to be with her. That's rough. The officials didn't come to Catalina. She went to them. She asked for an audience with the judge who was in charge of the court inside the Duke's palace. She knelt before him and told him, my grandfather had a secret life and a magic school, that we practiced witchcraft and Judaizing. She told them so easily she might have been telling him the names of the pigs in her yard. She did it as though turning us to the court was the simplest thing, a household chore, a recitation of a daily prayer. Catalina said that she had seen my grandfather place a spot of blood on our door on the day when known Jews celebrated Passover. When I asked my grandfather if this was true, he said people from our church did so, but it was the blood of chicken, not, as Catalina had said, human blood, the blood of a stolen child. Catalina told the judge she had never seen anyone in our family eat chorizo, and that brought on her initial suspicions. We refused sausage and roasts, and our pigs were our pets. She announced that we slept in bed with them. She had once heard my grandfather call my grandmother Sarah when Senora de Madrigal went by the name of Carmen to the rest of the town. And that's what the evidence came down to, a name. It was Friar de Leon who told us all of this, how Catalina had been escorted out of the old palace as though she were an important person, how she'd been dressed in silk, wearing new satin shoes. The friar told us we should leave our town, go without questions, and leave behind everything. But the soldiers came so quickly we barely had time to catch our breath. When they arrested my grandfather, they made sure to take everything they needed as evidence for the trial. This meant anything that mattered to us: our candlesticks, our silver, letters written from my father to my mother, even my box of trinkets from beneath my mattress in which I kept my pearls. Luckily, my mother had thought to hide her emerald ring in her shoe. The soldiers took almost everything else and nearly destroyed our house. Dishes shattered, furniture split in two, woven blankets torn apart. My grandmother came at one of the soldiers with a knife, but he just pushed her away and she fell to the ground. The soldier wasn't afraid of her the way I always had been. He barely even saw her. Don't fight with him, my grandfather said. We obeyed my grandfather, even though we wept as we did so. So you notice again, there's this repetition of he barely even saw her, that Catalina has stopped seeing her best friend, that almost like when you have this hatred inside of you, you also cannot see people for who they are, humans. And, so it could be love or hate that drives you to not see somebody for who they are. Um, and in these cases, it's definitely hatred. And we see Catalina's getting what she always wanted, right? We knew she was ambitious. And it says as she was leaving on this page that Catalina had been escorted, right? People literally walked her out and were like, oh my goodness, you're so amazing. She's wearing these new satin shoes. That would have been way more than Catalina could ever have hoped for in her life, because she never was going to rise in station or class. It was just a dream of hers. But she's making her dream come true at the expense of other people's lives. Watch what happens. Okay. At least the soldiers knew nothing about the hidden room filled with books and surgical tools. And they took only one member of our family because he was the one who'd been said to be an enemy of the church. The soldier in charge had the decency to let the great teacher, Jose de Madrigal, walk out the door free man, but he remained so just until he reached the end of the yard. Then they put irons on him, the heavy sort used for heretics and murderers. We were crying and screaming for him, the family of a man for whom there was no hope. We cried so many tears that the air itself had turned blue. Grandfather, father, husband, dearest man. The soldiers took our sheep from which my mother had made such fine yarn. The chickens scattered and hid under the house, but the pigs were herded together out the gate, down the lane, following behind my grandfather. And see, all this taking of things and destroying of things really shows you it's not just about like breaking a rule or being a different religion and practicing it. It's about making you feel less than human. It's about gaining wealth to maintain power, because it costs a lot of money to stay in power. And the Catholic Church is up here saying, "Oh, look at those chickens. I think we need those pigs." Um, like they're looking at the riches of these different families. Even if it was just a set of candlesticks, every candlestick counts, It's just rough. Okay. At the very last moment, one of the soldiers grabbed Deanie, my pet, oh no, and carried him away over his shoulder. Deanie was screaming and he sounded like a person. I tried to go after him, but my mother ran to me and held me back. She covered my ears. All the same, I could hear what the soldiers were doing. I could see it when I closed my eyes. My grandfather, my pet, my life, my world. I knew the monster on the plaza had walked through our house, destroying everything. We stood there, broken. And it's just like I told you, folks. It started by her watching, everybody's watching, and they're like, oh, that's so, that Jewish man's having his books burned. And then it was at the Arias's house. And now, like I said, it's inside her house, right? This monster is here in her house. Their silences didn't save them, right? Friar de Leon came again that evening to tell us we should leave. Leave my grandfather, leave our home. Now I began to understand why there were people who decided to stay. It was not so easy to abandon those you loved. When we refused to run, the friar told us we must stay away from the courthouse. I promised I would go no farther than the yard, but even while I said so, I had another plan entirely. I'd seen what had happened to the Arias family. I knew my grandfather's trial was to begin. The next morning, I told my mother and grandmother I was going to the fields behind our house. Instead, I made my way to the plaza, wearing a shawl over my head so no one would recognize me. I hid everything but my eyes. I sneaked in at the last moment before the court doors closed and sat in the back. I recognized someone a few rows in front of me. I knew her from the shape of her head, the rise of her shoulders, from the way she clasped her hands and rested them on a bench in front of her. Catalina. How had I never noticed how hard Catalina was, how brightly she shone when something bad was happening to someone else? She had watched us, my beautiful mother, my strong grandmother, my brilliant brother, and she'd been dull with jealousy. So dull, I hadn't seen what was shining beneath her skin. She was green with it. I saw that now. She would not be called as a witness. Only the judge would speak. All the same, Catalina was at the center of the trial, and she knew it. She was shining like an emerald. She had styled her hair carefully and put it up with tortoiseshell combs. I wondered if those combs had come from some Marano woman who'd been stripped of everything she owned. A long list of crimes was read out at last: heresy, Judaizing, magic, medicine, murder, blood. They called my grandfather a sorcerer, the greatest sorcerer of our town and of our times, the most evil, the most dangerous, an even bigger threat to the townspeople than the Black Fever had been. The court decided to test my grandfather. I had heard of such tests. They were like holding a witch's head under water to see if she would drown. Only her death could prove her innocence. A circle of impossible, deathly judgment. They brought out a sausage made of Deanie. Oh no, they killed Deanie. And they made this announcement. It had come from a pig that had lived for 3 years without being cooked, a pig that had slept in bed with the women of the family. People in the courtroom let loose with their disgust, cursing us, damning us, we who had become less than human, marranos, pigs. As for me, I felt something rise in my throat, the horror of the world of men. And you see again this whole idea of like, when we want someone to be a villain, when we want to feel okay about them getting punished in terrible ways, we find reasons to dislike them. Like, how could they not eat sausage? It's food. Like, that's a stupid reason to hate people. And yet the whole court goes wild and like, oh my God, they let a pig as their pet sleep in their bed. Oh no. Like, it's just crazy. Okay. My grandfather refused to eat the sausage. He said he was sick. He said he could not eat anything. He said he believed this court was unjust and that the outcome of every trial would suit the judge and not the truth. Good for him, speaking the truth. He knows that it's not going to save him and that he might as well get his digs in while he can, right? And call them sus. The guards opened his mouth and forced the sausage in. When my grandfather spat it out, they forced it back in, only this time they clamped his mouth shut with a metal mask. They tightened the mask until we could hear the bones in his face break. Oh, even in the back row. They told my grandfather he would be released when he'd finished eating the pig. After a while, he nodded, but when they unlatched the mask, he spit it out at them again. I saw the end of his life right there in a single moment. His pride, his decency, his secrets, his death. I will tell you those torture devices were real. They really did have a metal mask they would put on, and like on the sides there were like these little wheels, and they would spin them until like exactly it just like tightened. Oof. And it hurt and broke things, bones. The court officials had brought in a rabbi from the Juderia in order to question him. I recognized him. He was the old man with the beard whose books had been burned. He still wore the red circle on his vest. In the back of the court were two women dressed in black with the same circle sewn to their clothes. I looked at them, then looked away. I recognized the language they spoke, Ladino, a mixture of Hebrew and Spanish, the language my parents spoke to each other when they believed no one was listening. I felt the world that I knew tumbling away from me. The judge asked the rabbi if my grandfather was a Judaizer, practicing the rites of Jewry. Question after question came. Was he known to be a surgeon? Did he own books? Did he run a magic school? The rabbi said no to each question in a sharp voice. His voice was hard and seemed to be coming from a distance away. He had raven eyes, dark and deep. He spoke with a raven's voice, old and wise and far above the cruelty of the human race. The rabbi did not want to answer the court. Still, they questioned him. Was my grandfather a sorcerer, known to practice from books of magic and illumination? Could he take people apart and put them back together with a needle and thread? Did he chant during the new moon and fast and during fasting times? The rabbi looked at my grandfather. Over 100 years earlier, some had stayed and some had fled. Some had been forced into the Juderia where they'd been brutalized. Others went to Portugal or Amsterdam. Still others went underground and practiced their beliefs in secret. What difference did it make? There was no red circle on my grandfather's clothes, true enough, But now the worst crime was pretending to be something you are not. If this was true, what did it mean about Catalina, she who pretended to be my friend and was the opposite instead? When I looked at her, she appeared to be a different person from the one I'd known. My friend had disappeared into green smoke, and now I saw that the court had given her a gift for her betrayal. Catalina was wearing my pearls. She had rewritten everything, our history together, our friendship. Now I was the girl who'd stolen Andres, the girl who lied to her about who I was. Therefore, she owed me nothing. And that's a really good point, that when we feel betrayed by somebody, like, we will paint a picture of who they are. Like, we will not try to see it through their eyes. We will see it through our own. And, you're like, oh, I can't be friends with them. But remember, you can't claim anybody. Ugh, it's just a mess. I can't believe she's wearing her pearls. She's so horrible. And that poor Jewish rabbi, he already had his books burned. He already survived the beating in the plaza. And now they're calling him into the court to try to make him this, like, conspirator, right? Or like somebody who betrays his own people by, like, questioning, this guy who he probably does know, grandfather. I mean, but he's not, thank goodness he's not turning on him. But, like, this was used throughout history where people would be used against their own people. Like during the Holocaust, Jewish people in the concentration camps were used to um, be in charge of the whole block of people that were living inside a building, and would make sure to, like, say, like, oh, I saw this person had extra bread, and, like, rat out their other. And, during slavery, same thing. Black people were used sometimes as overseers over other people who were Black or African American. And it was just horrible, like, forcing people to turn on their own. It's not right to do that. Okay. To get my grandfather to speak, they arrested my mother. Catalina's mother had joined her daughter to offer the evidence against her. She told the judges that my mother laid eggs like a hen, blue eggs that were filled with human blood. Lies, it's not true. There had been a drought, and we had no rainwater in our barrel because my mother would not allow me to go for water. The guards arrested her while she was at the well in the center of the plaza, where the water had come directly from heaven, where my family had come to drink for over 500 years. They dragged her away by her hair. That is what our neighbor, Senora de Paz, had run to our house to tell us. When I went to search for my mother, there were strands of her hair everywhere. Birds were gathering in the plaza, 1,000 fluttering doves, each with a strand of black hair in its beak. The soldiers had dragged my mother over the cobblestones. My grandmother and I were both there in the back row when Abra was brought into court that same afternoon. There were still red, bloody bands running down her face, her arms, her legs. Because, yeah, what happens is, as they're pulling at your scalp, like, patches of your scalp would literally have ripped off because you're pulling, 100 plus, body, like maybe she's 140, 130 pounds, and they're pulling her by her own hair. Your hair can't handle that kind of tension. So, yeah, it would have ripped away from her scalp. So now she's just still bleeding. Not like they're going to bandage her up. And there was Catalina, only one row away. This girl is such a snake. She literally ate at their house, was welcomed by the family, and this is how she repays them. The judge first asked my mother if she could cure a cold. Like the rabbi with the red circle, she should have said no to everything. She should have become a raven. She didn't understand that every word the judge said was a trap, and that every word she said could easily be a stone used to shut her into that trap. My mother said it was a simple enough thing to cure a cold with a mixture of garlic and root teas. We could all tell from the judge's face that this was the wrong answer. The next question came. Could she make a baby come before its time? She could do so if necessary. If the mother was ill or the baby so big it needed to enter into our world early, she made an elixir of roots and leaves and had the mother-to-be walk around until dawn, preferably on the first night of a full moon. So all this they're going to paint as, like, they're going to say it's witchcraft, right? That she knows how to do this. Only God should be able to make children come early and things like that. That's what the church would say. My mother sat there calmly. She didn't understand how she had stumbled into the judge's snare until he began the next series of accusations. The judge's face was still expressionless, as if he were a reasonable man and this were a reasonable proceeding. Could she call fallen angels to do her bidding? Could she murder with a curse and a bit of blood smeared on the door? Could she seduce men by saying their names backwards a dozen times? Could the mark of the devil be found in her left eye? Could she lay eggs like a hen, and were those eggs indeed filled with blood? Did she, as witches and Jews were said to do, sleep with pigs in her bed? My mother had stopped speaking. The trap had closed over her, and there was nothing she could do. You cannot disprove the ridiculous. You cannot argue reasonably with evil. And that's a good point. I mean, they already judged her, right? They already thought in their heads, like, she's definitely guilty. We're just going to say whatever we want to and make her seem crazy. Abra de Madrigal did not look young enough to be my sister anymore. Her sorrow weighed her down and aged her. She was still beautiful, but she looked very far away. No wonder our people had raven eyes, so distant, so sad. No matter how wise she was, my mother looked like a woman who hadn't truly believed how much evil there was in our world, not until this moment. What I heard in that courtroom seemed like a dream. What I saw, a nightmare. Would I wake up and find the scene before me dissolved into ordinary life? I bit hard into the heel of my hand until I tasted blood, real blood, human blood. From the way I hurt, I knew the truth. There was no waking up from this now. Andres had heard what had happened when he came home from working in the fields. He had run to the courthouse to be with me. You can't be here, Andres told me. It's too dangerous. At first, I refused to leave. My grandmother looked over at Andres, surprised to see him. What is he doing here? She asked me. Nothing, I assured her. I turned to Andres. Go. Do you think it's over? Andres told me. My aunt has gone again to speak to the judges. Who knows what lies she'll tell? They'll come for the rest of your family, Raven. They'll come for you. When I whispered to my grandmother that we should leave, she waved me away. You go, she said. You shouldn't be here. You're a child. I went to the courthouse, out to the courtyard, with Andres, but I wouldn't go any further or any farther. I had to wait for my grandmother and bring her with me. Andres and I crouched in the shadows, not speaking. We were close enough to feel each other's hearts beating. When the crowd came pouring out of the court, I saw my grandmother limping along, pushed forward in the great swell of people. Andres reached for her and helped her toward the shadows. I told my grandmother that we were going into the woods, where we would be safe for the night. My grandmother pulled away. Sorry, guys. She insisted she had to go back to her house. She had to clean for when my grandfather came home. So it's interesting, it used to be Raven that would deny and be like, oh, that's not true, and very childish. But now her grandmother is starting to revert to being a kid who's like believing that grandfather will come back. Girl, they broke his face and they put him on trial. He's not coming back. There's no way. But she wants to believe it because she's so sad that, like, it's the only thing keeping her going. Andres and I looked at each other. My grandmother was overwhelmed by what was happening to us. She had moved back into the past because the here and now was too terrible. I was gentle with my grandmother, as if she were the child, not I. I told my grandmother she could clean the next day and that I would help her. But by now I understood. We were never going to live in our house again. For all I knew, the soldiers were waiting for us already. We got out of town as quickly as we could. Halfway up the hillside that led to the woods, my grandmother collapsed. She said she couldn't go any further. She had to go back to see my mother and grandfather. She had to have the house clean and ready. She had to stay in her bedchamber and lock all the doors. You have to go on, Andre said. Otherwise, Estrella will follow you back to town, and if she does, she'll be taken too. Is that what you want? My grandmother looked at Andres as though she had never seen him before. I'll protect you both, he said. We'll protect each other. So there's a lot going on here. You got Andres risking his life by even being seen with them. Because Catalina, remember, she's so mad that she could turn on Andres too. And so could the mother, Catalina's mother. And so, but Andres doesn't care. He's like, I'm taking you into the woods. You're going to get away from here because they're probably waiting for you at your house. And grandmother's fighting back because she's all like, my house is my safe place. No, it's not anymore. But he's promising to protect them. So we'll see how he does that. They killed my grandfather that night. While my grandmother and I were sleeping in a meadow, they beat him to death with stones. They broke his bones one by one. They tried to make him confess his sins, and he refused. Andres found this out from a farmer when he went to an orchard to buy fruit and cheese for our breakfast. People all over town had listened to my grandfather's cries, but there were none, only silence. When I told my grandmother what had happened, she held her hand up to stop me. She didn't want to hear. Do not speak of your grandfather again until we are in his presence, she told me. My grandmother seemed half the size she used to be. Saying a single sentence took most of her strength. All around her, there was a puddle of blue liquid, just as my mother had told me, the color of tears. So they did do stuff like this too, right? That they would torture people and try to get a confession out of them. And listen, under torture, people will confess to pretty much anything, right? For the pain to stop because the pain is overwhelming. But, the author chooses to show grandfather's strength in not crying out, that even if it hurt really bad, he refused to give them the satisfaction of crying out in pain or giving them an answer. And so, and that's happened before. There's like a famous case in the Salem witch trials where this guy named Giles Corey was accused of being a wizard. And so Salem, Massachusetts, is America, this was happening. And he's accused of being a wizard. And they are like, we're going to press you to death. Like, you have to admit you're a wizard. And so they laid him on the ground and put stones on top of him, heavy, heavy stones. And all he said was more weight, like he dragged them even then and was like, no. And so that's what grandfather's doing here. But wow. Okay. Andres thought it was his duty to protect us, but I wanted to protect him also, no matter how much it might hurt. It's not safe for you to stay with us, I told him on the day my grandfather died. I don't care, Andres said. Well, then, I don't want you here. He looked at me, hurt. Still, I went on. Sometimes a lie was told in the best interest of someone you love. Go now, I said. Promise me one thing, Andres said. You won't go back to town. He said to me. There were no longer any promises worth keeping. Don't come into the woods anymore, I told him. Forget the way, forget me. I turned so I didn't have to see him leave, but I knew when he was gone. I kept my eyes shut until there was silence, until I could no longer hear him walking away. So here she's trying to do, let me push him away so I can save him. Because, like, how many more people is she going to lose? Her mom, her grandfather. She can't lose Andres. Like, in her heart, she's like, I just couldn't take it. So she's trying to push him away. But I'm sure Andres is not stupid. He'll see what she's trying to do. She doesn't really want him to go away. The next day, I told my grandmother I was going to search for food, but that was another lie. I made sure she had water and that she was comfortable. Then I went into town. I wore my shawl over my head. I needed to go see my mother. I didn't care if it wasn't safe. Nothing was anymore. I wasn't the only one outside the wall of the prison. There were dozens of people there, all calling out the name of their son or daughter or husband, all losing someone they loved. In the plaza, a bonfire was being built. I could smell green wood. It burned my nose when I breathed it. Why are they doing that? I asked a man next to me. I had never seen a bonfire that tall. Everyone in this prison will be burned for heresy, my neighbor at the wall told me. They'll burn in agony. Excuse me. I saw my mother at a window, her face peering through the metal bars. I felt that I was staring into a pool, seeing my own reflection. I thought of the bowl of water my mother taught me to look into. It was true. Everything a person ever needed to know was right there in a single bowl small enough to fit in the palm of one's hand. My mother saw me. She threw something out the window, and I ran to get it. An old lady got to it before I could. It was a piece of wool with something wrapped inside. It belongs to my mother, I told the old lady. Well, now it's mine. The old lady was there to see what she could buy cheaply from these people desperately trying to sell family treasures in order to buy food and clean water for those they loved who were trapped in prison. The old lady unwrapped the fabric, greedy, then made a hissing sound. There was only a rotten onion inside. So, and this is another point that when things are going bad, sometimes you got these vultures who are like, oh, gee, how can I make a profit off of this? What can I do to make this worse for everyone? But pretend that I'm actually making it better, Um, because when you're in the prison, they wouldn't have been giving you clean water and food. Like, you would have just been sitting in there uncomfortable. And if they did give you food, it'd probably be moldy. Um, and so this lady is like, oh, I'll get them some food to, it's just a mess. Okay. This is what you want, take it. The old lady threw it to me. I held the onion in my hands. I did not have to peel it to find I had tears in my eyes. I looked at the window, but my mother was gone. I went down the street and found a place in the shadows. I sat down and peeled the onion. My mother had made a hole she had patched up with the onion skin. Inside was her emerald ring, the one my father gave her when he pledged his love, a lifetime and a world away. It was now her final gift to me. So I hope we're putting this two and two together. The book that we saw at the beginning of this whole section, Husks, had a ring on it. That's the ring. It's the ring that her mom was going to give her. So even beyond death, right? The dad is about to help them out with this ring because this emerald ring is worth money. One gift deserves another in return. So my mother had taught me, and so I believed. I went to the Muslim doctor's house in search of a gift for my mother. I had no one else to go to in such a time as this, no one with any power. We had to bang on the door before the yard boy answered, the one who'd brought us the chickens. When I said I needed to see the doctor, the boy shouted at me. We didn't speak the same language. All we could do was shout at each other. The doctor must have heard us. He came out and waved the boy away. I was afraid the doctor would shout at me too, but he spoke to me kindly, asking me what I wanted. Help for my mother, I said. You think I can do anything in this world? The doctor looked different than he had when his wife was alive. Ashy. He was wearing the blue garment his wife had made for him out of my mother's yarn. I could tell he'd put it on when his wife died and hadn't taken it off. Ooh, it must smell so bad. And just looks so dingy. But when you're grieving, I mean, you do all sorts of things, right? Things comfort you and you don't really care about how it looks or what it smells like. It just, makes you feel better. My mother helped your wife make something for you. Now you help me. I think I was crying. I sounded angry, but that's not what I was. They've built a bonfire on the plaza. My mother is one of the prisoners they intend to burn. I can make her something to help her into the next world, whatever that is for your people. The Muslims called us the people of the book. He knew who I was, and still he wanted to help me. I looked at the doctor. I was standing next to the red lily, the one that grew from true love. You understand me? The doctor said. It's to let her choose her time so that she flies away before the pain. So he's basically going to give her something that will kill her, but like once she takes it, she'll feel no pain. So like a morphine or something to that effect or laudanum. And if she takes enough of it, it'll make her not feel pain and then she'll just die. So basically she's going to choose to kill herself before she gets burned up. I nodded. I wanted that for my mother. It was all I could give her now. Wait here, the doctor said to me. When the doctor went inside his house, I sat down beneath an olive tree. The air was so heavy I felt I might fall asleep. Soon enough, the doctor's boy came out to me. He handed me a packet. Inside, there were 2 tablets made of white powder. We looked at each other, and then the boy ran away. I walked through the market, circling the fruit and vegetable bins until I saw a brown onion on the ground. I kicked it in front of me until I could reach down and steal it. I poked a hole into the onion and placed the tablets inside. My mother knew medicine. She was a healer. She would know the tablets were to take her far from this world, to help her fly. I tried to get back to the prison, but there were soldiers everywhere. A woman who went to our church and who sometimes made almond cakes with my grandmother, Senora Rocamora, grabbed me. Run away, she told me. They're looking for you and your brother. Thankfully, my brother was safe in the seminary. I asked my grandmother's old friend to bring the onion to my mother and to throw it over the gate when she saw Abra. Then Senora thought she might be too old and weak to throw anything over the prison wall, but before she could make up her mind, I lost her. The crowd started pushing, and in an instant, Senora Rocamora was gone, taken by the soldiers. The soldiers had come close to me. I had felt the heat from their bodies. I was wearing my shawl so that no one would recognize me, but just to be certain, I ran. When I got back to the woods, Andres was waiting for me. He was watching over my grandmother. He hadn't stayed away as I asked. The truth was, I had never been more grateful to see someone. As soon as my grandmother fell asleep, Andres and I went far into the woods. It was dark, but we could see by starlight. So now you know why we can never be together, I told him. We can't be together here, Andres said, but this isn't the only place in the world. I'll do anything for you. My grandfather had told me I should go to Amsterdam. Maybe we could go together, but I couldn't go anywhere yet. I wasn't finished within Califlora. I handed Andres the onion. If you want to do something for me, take this to the prison and call out my mother's name. When you see her, throw this inside to her. Tell her it's my gift to her. What else can I do? Andres asked. He meant it, so I asked for more. I had no pride anymore. You can try to get word to my brother. Tell him to leave the seminary and go as far away as he can. Tell him to go to Amsterdam. I'll get word to him to go there, Andres assured me. Andres didn't come back until very late. He brought us some bread and cheese. My grandmother and I had been starving. He did protect us, as he said he would, this time from hunger. But I knew he'd done much more. When my grandmother went to sleep, Andres and I went deeper into the woods. I asked if my mother had gotten the onion. She had. Andres had called out for her, and when she came to the window to see who was shouting her name, Andres had thrown her the onion through the bars. Abra quickly hid it within her clothes. Her hands were still blue from the yarn she dyed for so long. She had cried so many tears she had no more inside of her. Thank my daughter. My mother had called. It is the greatest gift she could have given me. Andres had also gone to see Friar de Leon. At first, the friar refused to speak to him, but when Andres explained that I'd sent him, the friar vowed to get word to my brother if he could. After that, Andres had done one more thing. He had also spoken with a friend who could help to get my grandmother and me to Amsterdam, where we could find the man my grandfather had told me about. From there, we would take a boat to an island so far away, nothing could hurt us. But it would cost dearly. I looked at Andres. Just the thought of leaving him stopped me. I'm going with you, he said. I took my mother's emerald from the chain on my neck and gave it to him to pay for our passage. My mother had been right. It was the one thing that lasted, the one thing we could depend on, other than our love for each other. It was all we had right now. So here's something that we're noticing, like, because her family has been, wealthy enough to acquire these different things, the pearls, the ring, although the pearls are Catalina's now, they've got this ring. They're able to buy their way out of the situation to escape the death, because otherwise they would have gone to some village and been homeless. They would have gone to some village and somebody would have said, oh, I heard about you in another village. And like, they couldn't have gotten far enough away, you know what I'm saying, to escape this. But if they travel on a ship, and pay for that with the emerald, like, it's going to pay for everybody. It'll pay for Andres, it'll pay for her, and it'll pay for her mom, her grandmother rather. So, we can only hope that's what's going to happen. And I don't know. This is a very emotional chapter, as you can tell, and an excellent, an excellent chapter, because it's really showing us how bad it was, right? It really, really was bad. And you need people to help you get through these bad times. It's important to have people who support you no matter what. Okay, have a great day, people. Bye.